everyone, this is that other Laura Ingram. Thank you for returning to my channel. If you're new, welcome. I'm going to get right into chapter 3 and go ahead and read that. If you haven't listened to the other chapters, I am reading my book online on this podcast. And I recommend you start from reading the preface, or at least chapter 1. And they're usually every third episode. This is going to be, I believe, my 11th or 12th episode. So I'm doing episode 2 and episode 3 back to back. And so I just did chapter 2. I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 3. But first, I want to thank my Patreon supporters, my sponsors. My anonymous sponsor who does not want to be named, I want to thank you so much for your contributions. And I want to thank Scott Buchanan also for your contribution. I really appreciate it every month and what you guys do for me. And if you want to become a Patreon supporter, I'm sorry, I just read the second chapter of the book, and that's a very tough chapter for me. So I'm kind of in the middle of this, and I'm trying to get through my Patreon spiel because I know I probably should. But yeah, if you want to contribute, if you want to help me out on Patreon, the links are in your description for your whatever app you're using. And now I'm going to go ahead and start chapter 3. I suddenly found myself on a daunting road trip, traveling in 5 rush days, 3,900 miles from the coast of the Pacific Northwest to the southeast Atlantic coast of Florida. We were blasting through as quickly as my luxury, all-leather interior 1978 Mercedes-Benz on its last legs mess of a jalopy would allow. The same strained pacing and dilapidated condition could also describe my brain at that moment. Nearly a wreck, but not quite there. And we only need you to just hold together and push through a little while longer. Oh God, please don't let us break down. I prayed to the dark, groggy haze of the very early morning. James had come to visit a little more than a month before this. He had flown into bustling SeaTac Airport and suffered the ghastly traffic that it was always difficult to believe existed between there and my home, a short distance away in Renton, Washington. He and his wife, Abby Watts, had flown out to go snowboarding with August and I at the relatively close lodge on Crystal Mountain. Wait. Let me explain, because my brain still has a nasty habit of nagging me to apologize for things that make Jehovah sad. You'll get used to that after a bit. Yes, it was definitely very strange that Abby had not taken the Reed name when she decided to marry James. She didn't have any children, and even if she had, most of the brothers and sisters still would have thought it a tiny bit scandalous to not set the example and just be a Reed. She had, after all, agreed for James to be her husbandly owner. Don't be creeped out by that wording. That's taken directly from the Holy Scriptures. In Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 14, God owns his people as property, and very much exactly unworrisomely the same way. That's just the normalist, really. Feeling thirsty yet? If not, perhaps just a hit will help while it's still on the verge of twilight. Maybe you could use a calming indulgence before we really get moving. I would now like to introduce you all to the Reed family, Brother James Reed and Sister Abby Watts. What Jehovah has yoked together, let no man put apart. Abby's father had orated, bringing their blusterous nuptials to a close. It had felt so bizarre, from knowing they had been publicly reproved in their congregation only a few months earlier. Those horridly sinful but clearly repentant fornicators, to the fact that Abby's father, not even an elder anymore, had performed their windy beachside ceremony. Beachsided, not kingdom hauled. Unignorably scandalous, let me tell you. But that's what we're all about. We were black sheep Jehovah's Witnesses. Our feet dangled from either side of the fence as we teetered on top of it. James and I had always been that way. We knew it. Most everybody knew it. We simply wanted to do what was right. We always tried to do what was right, what we knew to be principled, kind, and practical. Period. Or at least, I know I tried. Overall, this is what had led August and I here to the Pacific Northwest in the first place, losing the respect of people who just didn't understand where we were coming from, or not want to understand. Yet the focus was essentially Jesus' first and second commandments. He said to love God and neighbor, right? It shouldn't be as complicated as everyone always made it out to be. I knew the Bible, and I knew which scriptures conflicted and which were the gray areas, and which were simply ideal situations people pulled from their watchtower and scrapbooked into their Better Homes and Gardens life, the half-baked cultists edition. James had also understood this, but not because he ever studied or quoted as much scripture or doctrine. Unlike me, he hadn't gone to the pioneer school or served as a ministerial servant or reached out for much at all in his congregation as we grew up. He found himself in the long shadow of a father who was a respected elder, so he had a good understanding of the social dynamics within the congregation, along with a more uncommon load of common sense and practicality. If anything, though, he might have been a little too driven by that treacherous heart of his. James understood. I had let go of so much for him, in his own moment of pain and struggle, to hear him out, to listen, and to try and understand. I had so many times with other friends as well, and so had James. To put it shortly, it was who we were, and it was the same with others we had each led into our respective lives over the years. Compared to James and Abby, August and I were also obviously a very different couple. Together, we never cared much about James and Abby's strange wedding ceremony. I'd proudly walked down that grassy aisle, side by side with Abby's maid of honor, and August had even taken wedding photos. Sure, the scene was pretty far out of the typical Paradise New World ordinary, but James was for sure far happier with Abby in the picture, and that's what mattered. The one thing that had ever really bothered me was that Abby's divorce had only been just finalized when James had asked her to marry him. That, I felt, was a red flag, if there ever was one. But after voicing my concern there to James, that was all I could do. I had also been a tiny bit concerned as a friend when, a short time later, James nonchalantly brought up that he and Abby had decided that he would get a vasectomy. I had such a perplexing time believing that was his idea. What was the point? To mutilate his body like that? Lightning struck. A blinding flash amidst all the smoke coming off my pipe. It's gloomy outside, but I'm not sure if the blinding spark came from out past the window or if it was my psyche, a little fried. I'm on a plane. I'm reading a book. Hearing Brandy Alexander tell me how repetitive and boring I was, telling me the secret way to find true happiness. The next thing my brain regurgitates is, of course, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And suddenly I'm that questioning believer again, and back to that conversation with James. Overall, I couldn't understand why he'd be okay with likely losing the prospect of ever having children. Never having that happiness or learning the love and joy that comes amidst all the other, admittedly arduous labors of being a parent. Besides, lately he just wasn't as generally accepting of people who did things differently. I remember it was all kind of shocking, even without my worry. Looking back now, I find it so telling that he felt like he could come to me with that information. He never once expected me to say, "What the hell, dude? That's so fucking gay." I was just a bit more concerned with his well-being and relationships than anything else. Somewhere between the gloom of my thoughts and the wisps of burning bud, Claudio Sanchez is belting out, "You're the weight of his anchor, the love that is guiding him home," while the rest of Coheed and Cambria hammers out low guitar growls, snarling in defense of doing what we can for those we love, even if they just can't see it all yet. I let out a deep sigh, still too anxious and deep in my waves of memories to sleep. I'm so compelled to do this because it feels like it's another debt I have to pay back. All this time, maybe I just couldn't see it. Somewhere, that's the feeling. Well, there are orphans abandoned all over the world, and this system of things is no place to raise a child, James had mouthed. Then he went on to reason. Me? I loathed it. How could I bring another child into this? Yes, that's really how James talks. Since I met him in 4th grade, he would always favor vocabulary like loathe or detest over hate, or rudimentary or crude over simple. That was his everyday speech. I had remained thoughtful. I know that's what we used to say. Besides, he continued, seeing the hell it's been for you in August, why exactly would I desire that? I feel differently now, I defended, more than a little stung. It's like marriage. You're never really ready. You just learn. That's life. I just hope you don't end up regretting it later, Jay. Oh, I won't, he chortled. It seems like he hadn't. At the time, I had only been a bit concerned that Abby and I didn't seem to get along very well, but I kept that to myself. Underneath all that blonde hair and fair skin, she was kind of a self-absorbed bitch sometimes. But whatever, it was probably my perception. I could be a little paranoid about how people viewed me. I never really felt at home in my own skin, always awkward. So maybe I was just projecting a little. James had probably told her that I was mistrusting at first. She'd come around and we'd be friends. James and I had been best friends forever since elementary school, even though we hadn't talked as much over the past few years. That would never change. Even if I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, I doubted we'd ever stop talking. I can't ever imagine life without my friend Sam, he had said once upon a time. In the time between making the plans and their arrival in Seattle, August and I had discovered we had been very ignorantly pregnant with our second child. The news had been both excited and gleeful for us. One of those happy little life snapshots you cut and paste foreground to maybe a cute festive backdrop in that mental scrapbook with bubbly pink lettering spelling out "surprise." And there's tiny rosy hearts and vibrant paper balloons all around. Unexpected but thrilled. Sure, it was a bit early and hadn't quite exactly been on purpose, but we had been planning on another child soon. So there was, of course, an ever-present euphoria in the air. The only thing that could have made me happier is if I had been carrying our baby myself. I was so envious, but it was pretty darn obvious my body just couldn't handle it. 3 years apart, I had worked through the pregnancy envy last time. And this time, at least I felt prepared for my role in all this. We each had a secure job with amazing benefits, a decent apartment home, and our 2-year-old son was at that perfect age, ready for a playmate. One more troublemaker in the house was almost a need in a way, the little household crimes taking place, the crayon writing on the wall, the food stored in the couch, the random poop smear on the floor. They needed a suspect lineup. not a Saturday morning supervillain where you always just know he did it, then that's seriously the most coherent way I can explain that. So, on James and Abby's last visit, we had been alive with this joy and expectant electricity. They had stopped by on their way back to the States from a year of need grading in New Zealand. This is more of a colloquial term in our little Jehovah's Witness culture, referring to traveling and serving and preaching where the need is great, but funded entirely from your own pocket or by friends and family. And James' father, Dalton, was an engineer with a 3-figure salary and always ready to help James and Abby out. Dalton had bought their tickets back to the States, and they had requested a little stopover in Seattle just to go snowboarding with us. And this was well before August and I had found out our happy little news. Although they shared a small measure of our bubbling excitement, Abby was clearly a bit annoyed that I suggested maybe we forgo the snowboarding trip and do something else. She had never tried to hide the fact that she did not like nor want children. Her awkwardness around playful 3-year-old Jack was bordering on painful to watch. Jack and August could still come and hang out at the lodge and watch, she offered, a concealed plea. They'd have a good time. August didn't appreciate that much, and I had heard about it later. Her torso had already expanded close to beach ball size, which was tough on her tiny frame. She was a pregnant force to be reckoned with for sure. Jack had come with no drugs being administered apart from a bit of her own adrenaline and serotonin. If you need, if it'll help, I had stammered, attempting to think on my feet as I witnessed August growling from involuntary labor spasms and escalating agony. I'm here. Just punch me. And in a blur of brown, a compact flinging fist to my gut had been all the drugs she had desired. Still, this didn't mean she wanted to waddle around Crystal Mountain worrying about a 3-year-old and not really being able to join in on what we were all there for. Unfortunately, Abby hadn't realized then that James would be back in my apartment a mere 2 months later, but with no children and no pregnant August to worry about. Probably she would have been less impatient. Perhaps we would have gotten along better in the year that followed. It was February of 2011, because it's time I start putting dates to some of this. Not to mention, it's been 7 years since then to the month. The 7 denotes heavenly completeness, my mom would say, smugly, holding the microphone while visibly feeling very proud of the studious answer she had garnered from the pages of her watchtower. That's right, some pious stuffed shirt would remark from the podium. And so, what should we glean from the usage of 7 here, brothers and sisters? Herbs burn red, and its light reflects in the air. There wasn't as much smoke wafting through the atmosphere on that day that James and I had set out those 7 years ago, but it was just as dark and just as early morning as we packed the car to the brim with items from the apartment. You know, James tried to sound encouraging as he tucked a box of dishes into the back seat. You came out, and you tried. You got to live out here in this gorgeous area next to the mountains for 7 whole months. I'm glad we were able to come visit and go snowboarding together. It's beautiful. Yeah, December was nice, I admitted slowly. I wish August had been able to come with us. I feel like she misses out on everything. It's better that you just had her fly back, James bolstered. A 4,000-mile trip would be difficult for her and the baby. I don't think she'd enjoy it much in the end. He paused for a moment and sighed, deciding what to pick up next. Oh, you were referring to the snowboarding. He settled on the gigantic blue cooler, still resting on the orange flatbed we had taken down to the parking garage from the community elevator. I shuffled in to help him, knowing how difficult it'd be. We wheezed and then lifted it in and onto the passenger side rear seat. reorganizing a few boxes to make it fit snug. There wasn't any food in that one. We had a smaller red cooler full of lunch meat, crackers, cheese, oatmeal, little smokies, and a few other snack and drink items for the road. However, that larger blue cooler I had packed with our kitchen utensils, my fancy knife set from JCPenney's, our kitchen scale, Alton Brown's I'm just here for the food, and several more minute appliances and cookware. August and I had run out of boxes while we were packing. The thing was now about 10 times heavier than it looked like it should be. Both, honestly, I heaved with a bit of exhaustion. She was really looking forward to going, wanted to ski. I breathed in again before finishing. She didn't even get to go into the snow even once while we were here. The stress of it was getting to me. I was indignant still, despite being grateful James had come to help. August and I had planned to build a life here. We'd fallen so incredibly in love with the Northwest. We adored that unique, syncopated amiability downtown Renton exuded. We were becoming fond of the gentrifantastic neighbors around here. It was a special place. More than any other time I could remember, especially out of the past 2 years, I had felt a deep inner calm growing. All of that was being ripped from us so abruptly. I can't thank you enough for coming out and helping me with this, I admitted, a bit of melancholy tracing every word. I was really hoping y'all could come out again next year. Hey, we're both moving back in with parents in Florida, James awkwardly encouraged. Easy to feel like a bum. I'm sure you'll find something quickly and exceeding your expectations with your experience. My stomach lurched. I don't want to go back to construction. I'm never going back to that. I promised myself. I didn't even want to do maintenance here. I hate it. I'm afraid of heights, but you just have to not be. You have to force yourself, and that's just one part of it. Yeah, James reflected for a moment. You should wait tables. Abby and I do restaurants, and you can make a lot in tips. If people tip you well, I interjected, a little sullen. The past few weeks had been a catastrophe, and James knew I was back and forth between riled, enraged, worried, and trying to remain calm and hopeful. I wouldn't. Believe me. I'm not at all good with people. I know everyone says that, but I really do have just this terrible anxiety, and really I just can't even keep up. It's only easy when I'm preaching, and that's totally different. I know I wouldn't do well at all. That was something I had tried to come to terms with in myself, my whole life, that I just felt uncomfortable and nervous around people. At the Kingdom Hall, I felt much more comfortable. Of course, the conditioning took most of my childhood, but I understood that reward system well enough, and I had watched and figured out simply what made the congregation and its people tick. It became absolute predictability, and I learned how to navigate based on how anxious I was feeling in the day. In school, though, my discomfort was constant and far worse, which is how I had remembered it since elementary school. Did you bring back your permission slip for our Christmas concert, Sam? My kindergarten music teacher, Mrs. Clark, had sent it home weeks ago, and for weeks she couldn't comprehend why I hadn't returned mine. If you don't return it soon, I can call home to Mom or Dad. Mrs. Clark was an old-school traditional music teacher from the days of corporal punishment in school. I was kind of afraid to do anything with that permission slip at all. I wasn't allowed to sing the Christmas songs or be in the kindergarten winter performance. Actually, I wasn't supposed to say that. It was supposed to be my choice, that I believed it was wrong. But I couldn't get it out. Not only was Mrs. Clark a very intimidating woman to a 5-year-old, I loved the songs. I would have loved singing them, even if they hadn't been capable of unwrinkling Mrs. Clark's authoritative frown into one of the most jovial and festive Christmas spirits in the most dramatic transition you've ever seen. My sister had come clean with Mrs. Clark, but she was older, and Mrs. Clark didn't know Sarah was my sister. However, since we went to the same school a few days before the concert, I mustered up the boldness and told a very confused Mrs. Clark in my young, obstinate, and coached voice that all the holiday songs I had been happily singing in class were against my religion. After that, I was carefully upfront about my parents' faith and my own strict and parroted moral expectations, but I was open about very little else. I learned to be cautious when dealing with everything else. As early as third grade, I had once wondered if thinking my friends were going to die at Armageddon was somehow separating me from them. I wanted to understand the inconsistencies gumming up my own psyche at the tender age of 8, but I wasn't heroic enough of a child to face it then. Damn it, if only I were a ballsier 8-year-old. People didn't believe me, but I knew I'd have issues connecting with people well enough to make decent tips in the service industry. I doubted I'd even be able to hold on to a job seriously. I was helplessly disconnected from anything that wasn't Jehovah-oriented, and I knew it. But Jehovah was supposed to be the center of your life. He always comes first. It was a career on its own. As I got older, I could go preaching and I could get people's attention, show them scripture and market those watchtower books and brochures. I learned to use this marketing mode at other jobs, but I could never really connect because I had learned to believe in products more than I did in real people. And there was only one product I truly had faith in. So I'm not even sure how to identify real people. You don't have a problem, Sam, Mom would reassure. You're just being lazy. Your teachers say you can't stay on track at school, but I know you can. You just get lazy and procrastinate. Granted, my perfect sister didn't seem to have any issues, so maybe let's move ahead with that argument for at least a good decade. Forgive me, Jehovah, Mom. Everyone does say that, James agreed. I'd say perhaps you should throw yourself into it and you'll surprise yourself. James paused, trying to decide if he should continue. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if you were suffering from something. He sighed with purpose. Like Asperger's. You know what that is, right? I've known a few people who have had it big time, and I could see maybe a lesser extent with you. I don't know, I breathed. James went on. I think maybe you shouldn't give up on the whole electrical thing so easily. You could work with Abby's dad. He's a contractor. Or maybe you could find a maintenance job down there. You do have your family to think about. You got a toddler, a little baby girl coming, of course. Yeah, maybe, I mumbled. However, the thought of going back to the trade felt like dying. I was so filled and overwhelmed with unchecked anxieties in returning to construction that ignoring them now felt no different than giving up the ghost. I had simply remained quiet, though, turning back one last time to face the elevator shaft that had led to our family's home for the past 7 months. Further down the garage was the same as further down a rabbit hole. There was an electrical room, which I still had a key to. I had thought several times over the past weeks of doing an old electrician's sabotage trick, removing the lines from their terminals, taping up the ends of the exposed copper with several layers of electrical tape, and then tightening the terminal lugs again. It would be easy. There were separate disconnects for each panel. They would call the power company and probably several contractors before figuring out what had happened. They'd probably also have to pay back a lot of renters for spoiled food at the very least. We shouldn't have been fired. I had never been fired from a job before, and there was no reason for it now. We worked our little butts off here to get the property in shape. Our boss, Sammy Simpson, was essentially a cheerleader. I wasn't exactly sure how she'd gotten her position as portfolio manager, but it's pretty clear there must have been some catering of some sorts going on back and forth. Apply imagination liberally. She was fairly horrible as a person, but amply unethical as a portfolio manager. We had turned the property around, cleaned the prior management's mess, and then our pregnancy became an abrupt, unexpected cost. The ludicrous thing was that Samantha was pregnant too, around the same time. She announced it excitedly to all the property managers last month. But August and I had never expected her to be the self-centered bitch she ended up being. We had been just as happy for her as we had been for ourselves, but she seemed less than enthusiastic about our news. To me, it was just that Sammy did not want to share her limelight at all, let alone with a Hispanic woman. This was her pregnancy, her perfect white pregnancy. And as the hormones dug in, it had to be all about her, at home and at work and everywhere else. I hate sharing the same name as that slut. I had warned August that it was a risk saying anything about it just yet, but we were excited too, and she had. And in the next month, we were terminated. I wanted to do something. I thought about taping up those lines, but my thoughts and anger raced far faster than that. This was going to destroy us. We had put everything on the line to get here, but now we were devastated. I had no idea how we'd really recover in time for our daughter's birth. Overflowing with upset, there were manic thoughts taking over. Why am I thinking this way? What was wrong with me? They say violent thoughts are natural sometimes, but who could ever understand these feelings? Even if I tried to explain myself, I would never do anything like that. So why exactly did these thoughts come? Why couldn't I just be sad, depressed, and be consoled? Why? It's okay to be overwhelmed, but why did it have to transform into anger? And at that level, I didn't want these thoughts. Take them from me. I love you. We'll figure it out. We always do. August had listened and made me feel okay to talk about it then, but I still didn't really feel okay about it. I swallowed it all hard and turned back to the car. We'd better get going. And we did. I remember probably most vividly the bridge as we were entering Portland. On the way through Washington, James and I veered off from the touchy subjects and talked about our travels. He and Abby had backpacked through Asia, of course, so hearing about how it changed his perspective on the world was just enlightening for me. I had been to Costa Rica and seen the overwhelming poverty outside of the tourist locations there, but I had never been to any country out east of the Atlantic. We think we're so much better developed over here, but Americans really don't know what they're missing, he reminisced, expounding on China's public internet, the standards and low crime of Singapore, and New Zealand's public healthcare system. At the same time, I really missed the food over here. In New Zealand, you just couldn't really find cheese or other specific foods that tasted as good. We both missed that. I'd guess there's something in the water. Portland was almost 3 hours out from where we had started, in Renton. The Columbia River Bridge wasn't as massive and wide as I had expected compared to the flashy Sunshine Skyway I'd grown up with in Florida. It looked like a relic from a long-ago industrial era, painted a sage green, but aging. Also, it was crammed with traffic. We stopped at the gas station to get some coffee. I also took some hot water for an instant bag of oatmeal, and silently lamented to myself that this was going to be my only Portland experience. We had a schedule to keep, and didn't even have a chance to stop for Voodoo Donuts. Some of the ladies at work had said it was worth the trip. Across the fourth dimension, in the murky shadows of early morning St. Helens, somewhere between the fog rolling off the Columbia River and the wisps of smolder trailing off my water pipe and light breaths, I realized I still haven't been. Next time, maybe. The scenery, the green rolling hills as we left Portland, and Mount Hood off in the distance was a natural art I needed to feel right then. Taking it in helped. From the distance of the interstate, the evergreen trees looked like flat, doughy grass with shadows like claymation, rounded out as if on a giant chia pet. There were, every once in a while, little ant-sized houses sprinkled in between, quaint and pretty and hopeful with life, unambiguously living and entirely unaware of inhabiting an inspirational presence in my heart in addition to the protective foliage-filled valleys of the terrain. I took out August's digital SLR so I could take pictures and show her. I wished she was with us. You're not going to pull her across the nation on this giant road trip while she's pregnant. My mom's words from a week prior rang in my ears. You're not going to put her or my grandchildren through that, would you? That wouldn't be good. Come on, Sammy, be responsible. But she really wants to go. She says that, but she will regret it. Send her and Jack on a plane, and I'll pay for that at least. I had eventually reasoned August into it, but I knew it's not really what she wanted, and that sucked. Just like all the other hard decisions when life falls apart and there's nothing to depend on but this interposing belief system and culture you already urgently needed to gain space from and answer questions to. Just like deciding to trust family and return home when you're jobless and pregnant with a second child. Just like bringing Nimbus to the animal shelter because there was no space for him. How Jack cried. How everyone did but me, even though it hurt and even though I wanted to. I wanted that release. Why couldn't I have it? James and I had been listening to music while pointing out different parts of the scenery to each other. He had connected his MP3 player through a tape adapter in the old steel gas guzzler. I used my camera to take videos here and there as the earth whizzed by, hills seeming to whittle down into fields, which then burst forth fresh new mounds in a matter of minutes. All the while, the deep, dark greens began to fade to browns, with a sprinkling of little emerald tufts here and there. I took out my lyrics journal. I kept that with me to write anything that popped into my head. I started writing. Do you have any Bayside? I would love to hear Blame It on Bad Luck, I inquired, hopeful. James had introduced me to Bayside years ago, and I still loved them. Oh, wow, yeah. I haven't listened to them in a long time, James says with wide eyes and a thoughtful grin. The song gets right to the point. Assume it's just not worth getting back up, so blame it on bad luck. Will you sink with the ship, or will you burn it down? Claudio asks my 24-year-old past self. Meanwhile, James and I were singing, like those days we used to in our little attempt to start a band. Incubus came on next, and I belted that out too, here in my room, while James harmonized for a bit. What did you write? James asked, interested. I read it to him. I know it's hard now, but I have faith in you, bud. We'll figure it out, James tried to encourage. I feel a little resentful myself, coming back and seeing how different I am treated over here than I was back in New Zealand. People can be so hypocritical. Remember that email you and Abby sent? I recalled. About getting a new apartment and new furniture, and then you said something about how Jehovah had blessed you. That kind of pissed me off, considering what August and I were going through. Also considering our itinerary for life. I smiled. Remember that when we were kids? We were going to go to New Zealand for graduation. Just never happened. James guffawed. Oh, yeah. We had it all planned out. We did. I definitely remember. We reminisced for a bit. Yeah, I think I even still have a copy of it somewhere on my hard drive, I continued. But, I was happy for you too. And I think you probably get it. But a lot of people are way worse than that. Haughty and presumptuous all the time. So insincere. Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't think that one through to its full fruition, he said. And you know how Abby is. Just her with her writing. Yeah, I was cautious to agree. But I feel so uncertain of everything right now. And that's not you. Not at all. I'm not saying that. It's just that I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Nothing I've wanted to do. And just how exactly am I benefiting my family? I have to admit, life lately, as well as you and August's situation in particular, give me pause. In fact, your entire life, I felt like you've been dealt a sore hand with the things that have happened and how your parents treated you. James interjected. And it's been a while. We don't talk that much anymore, and I miss it. We got just under 4,000 miles together to do that, discuss everything, and lots of gorgeous mountains to gawk at along the way. James, I'm probably not thinking the way you're guessing. But like I said on the phone, I'm going to go to college. That I know. I am going home and I'm getting started on my electrical engineering degree. It's the one thing I keep coming back to. Well, one of the few things, but the only thing that is actually practical. But I don't care what anyone says, I finished succinctly. I'm going. I think that's good, James calmly reassured. I think a lot of people back in Royal Palm Beach congregation will try to stop you and talk you out of it, probably even your mom, but I bet my dad will be supportive. It had been a long day of driving. We were about halfway through the northeast corner of California, and our first night was going to be spent at a hotel in Carson City. As we began to sharply climb in elevation, snow and slush started to appear along the side of the road. It was sparse, but I wondered just how much we might run into this time of year. I had planned the route to try to mostly avoid it. There was a chill in the air. Thinking about facing Dalton, James' father, made the cold feel even sharper and more bitter. I can't face your mom and dad, not with all the help that they gave us. And how suddenly we left when we found this. It's so embarrassing. I don't even know what they think of us right now. No way, James dissented against my anxieties. Your family, and he views you like a son. I flinched. I know. I feel it. The total mass of life expectations isn't much different than that coming from my own father, although Dalton was a slight bit better at being personal at least. My own was just aloof, and a bit weird, filling in as the colorful, cartoonish phantasm haunting my decisions within my personal life's little speedily penned screenplay. I lightly cough, stirring up the spectral bellows enough to plainly see the time on the wall. 1 o'clock in the morning. I really should try to cozy up to a little bit of sleep finally. Claudio and the gang has long since stopped serenading me. My bowl of cannabis was all but spent. I'll stop to face the apparition eventually, but the least I could do is make sure I get enough sleep so that the journey wasn't a waking nightmare. It was my worry that had been keeping me up, but now it was more the sativa. Once that wore off, I'd be conked out. We had made our way to Reno, and then south to Carson City as we entered Nevada from Northern California. They had stopped all the vehicles at the state line. Some government agent and officer came up to the window and asked us if we had any fruits with us. Just him, I laughed, pointing at James, never missing an opportunity for a little deflection and posturing. The officer smirked and shook his head. I have to imagine now that he probably had heard that joke countless times before, but back then, I wasn't very aware. After getting a hot wire deal and a night in a Carson City Best Western, including a continental breakfast, we headed west slightly to Lake Tahoe. I had planned to make some modest detours so the trip would be a little more exciting, and this was one of them. The lake was a dazzling crystal clear blue with a completely serene reflective surface, perfectly encapsulating the snow-tipped mountains proudly beaming over the water. The reflection was kind of like an alluring window to the Phantom Zone. Yes, exactly. That mirror dimension where Superman throws his worst enemies so they can never escape. As I took pictures of the landscape, I was drawn to the water's surface. I took off a shoe and dipped a toe in. It was frigid. If I dove in, I might go numb and not come back out. I'd sink to the bottom of hell, but that frozen over version everybody talks about. How bad could that be? It's even less likely to exist, so no worries. This is breathtaking. It reminds me of New Zealand, James remarked. I know, I'm just in awe. I swooned again at the view. So, James began, trying not to break the mood, but clearly aware of our time. Yeah, I think we should be getting going too, I nodded. Yeah, we still have about 3,000 miles to cover, and just 4 days, James reminded me. And there will be a shitload of other mountains and canyons and other awesomeness to see on the way. I'm sorry, dude, I said. I wish I had more to spend on hotels, or I would have dragged this out longer and we would have been able to see and do a lot more. I would have brought August too, but I'm glad you came, man. No worries, James sounded confused. I'm having a good time, taking all this in with my best bud. It's an adventure. After canning ourselves back into my dilapidated Mercedes, terribly and sincerely afraid it would give out at any moment, I began driving towards Las Vegas. Or so I thought. Eventually, we found ourselves heading back into the cool snow blues and grays of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. What happened? I asked after a few hours of that, a little vexed. Are we supposed to be heading back into California? Because that's what it seems. I was driving and had been carefully listening, following whatever directions my trusty Magellan GPS navigator had been buzzing out, but had been silent for a while now. James grabbed it and tapped the screen with his fingers. I could already tell it was unresponsive. Wow, it's not receiving a signal, James laughed. We passed signs for Yosemite National Park, and then the Mammoth Lakes were becoming visible. Shimmering plains interrupting the Rocky Mountain terrain. The snow was becoming heavier, thickly covering the ground in brilliant, sparkly fluff. Luckily, we had brought an atlas with us. The road to Las Vegas, over an entire snow-covered mountain range, and through Death Valley, troubled me. James was boldly excited, though, for the adventure, and that was contagious enough to keep me from overstressing. The night quietly crept in, and as we traveled through the pitchiest black on the narrowest cliffside roads I'd ever been on, I finally admitted to James that driving was beginning to frighten me. I'll take over. I don't mind, James gallantly offered. These roads aren't anywhere near as treacherous as a few of the ones that I've been driving over in New Zealand. And on the entirely opposite side of the road, too. I can't imagine, I exclaimed, impressed. I brought the junker to a stop, and we changed seats before James started off again. You know, I began, I've been thinking about college a long time, and like I said, electrical engineering is what I keep going back to. I've liked the load calculations and circuit design I've been able to do just as an electrician. Sure, James thinned his lips and nodded. I've been thinking about going for web or graphic design, maybe a 2-year certificate. I'm pondering a lot of things. Tell me about it, I said, pausing and wondering if maybe this was a decent time to really dig deep and come clean with him. Well, after being married a year, I feel unbelievably close to Abby, he said. We've done a lot together and depended a lot on each other out there. That's really great, man. For some reason, my stomach lurched and something dry got caught in my throat. I swallowed. Yeah, but at the same time, it's been really great to have this space and time to think. James groaned, a barely audible groan. While we were there in New Zealand, she wanted to do more and more in the congregation, and that was easier there. But here, it's not the same. People are way different here, and nowhere near as inspiring or even very nice. It's this glaring incongruence. I'm not sure if Abby and I both see it the same way. No, yeah, I tripped over my words with a little disbelief. No, I'm not trying to bring you down either. Honestly, it's just best to be positive. No, Jay, I spoke solemnly. I get what you're saying, and this is kind of difficult for me to put together, so give me a moment. I breathed in, and then exorcised the demons. When we were staying with your mom and dad, I exuded nonchalance. Your dad watches a lot of politics, you know that? Oh, I know, James chuckled. He keeps up with the world affairs and then even gets deep into some of those commentaries. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell is a good one. Yeah, I smirked. Yes, exactly. I love him. Your dad watches Hardball a lot. But I especially love Rachel Maddow. She's so stinking interesting, the way she puts things. She's a lesbian, I think. James laughed some more. But yeah, I could see that. She's kind of over the top. It's so funny, I said. I mean, as an elder, he's not supposed to be involved in politics. Nah. James brushed my thought away with a sideways look. Not in North Palm Beach congregation. They're all like that there. And besides, he's the presiding overseer. Well, I thought it was kind of funny. I shrugged. A little weird, but then also I learned a lot there. You guys have so many channels, and we barely ever had cable in my house. Yeah, your dad was cheap, James remarked. My laughter echoed through time, reverberating through the energies and winds and into my fading room, shutting my eyes on St. Helens for the night. True, I nodded. But really, I looked into a lot while we were there. There was this documentary I saw on the Buddha and the life of the prince before he became the Buddha. Do you know his name? James shook his head, listening. I don't remember, but the documentary really made me think how he saw suffering instead of sins. And then I stopped short, but then realized I just needed to move on. I could trust James. I always had and always would be able to. You know, the Bible, even our Bible, quotes from books that aren't considered as part of the Bible canon. I breathed heavily. Other religions call them apocryphal. And then there are other things, like what we believe about the Trinity. Our Bible is made to fit. Like, they changed the grammar so it seems not true. But I don't know if I can explain it, but yeah, James pursed his lips again. There's a lot to ponder, like I said. Yeah, well, yes, I continued, emboldened now. I don't know about a lot anymore. I let that sink in and settle in the electrified atmosphere. With everything that's happened and how we've been treated by people that were supposed to be some of my best friends, I just don't know. But like I said, I'm going to college. I'm going to learn everything I can. I've done everything right. I've followed Jehovah's standards. I fumed while tears began to flow from pools of long-term stress that boiled under my eyes. I was trying to help people. I was always there, always for my friends. I followed things the way I was supposed to. I let things go. You don't even know how much, man. But now, with all the questions, I need answers. The silence counted down, waiting for a reply. 5, 4, 3. I don't even know if I can believe anymore. I interrupted, spilling. I'm being honest because I literally can't stand to be anything else right now. But for real, I don't even know if I can believe. So I intend to go home and go to one meeting maybe for my mom. But I don't even want to go once. It makes me feel sick inside, seriously. Because I need my time away. I don't care what her issue is. She can decide to not let us stay there or whatever she wants. But look. James stopped my foray into near hysterics. Look, I know how you feel, Sam. And I think you should take that time. Don't give up on your friends. I think people love you and August and Jack and even that little unborn baby way more than you know. I know your brother and Sarah and Will are all ecstatic you are coming back. Will was practically hyperventilating. James laughed an inward laugh and then took a lengthy inhale of the ignited atmosphere before proceeding. I get what you're saying. I see through it all, too. All the fake. I stared at James, hopeful, but still a little puzzled by this type of candor, which felt like had again arrived at a mutual place from different roads like we had so often throughout our growing up together. It's like I'm free. I see it all. I can move around. I look around and observe. I am no longer chained to this tower wall. Those shackles I have loosed from myself. I see through a lot. After a long, hard pause and a breath, he groaned. However, I look around and I notice my family and everyone I love hasn't loosed their chains. They're still chained to the wall, and I'm, of course, chained to them. Mouth agape, it took me some time before saying anything. I don't think I could say it any better. That, my friend, was amazing. That's exactly how I feel. Death Valley unfolded before us, just ahead of the old Mitsubishi's lights, like a pop-up book at super speed. I had the camera out again, relieved I had gotten it all out, and amazed there was still such an understanding between me and my oldest and truest friend. We got lost and ended up driving through Death Valley in the middle of the night, I explained to the people who might eventually watch. It's super dark, pitch black without any lights for miles, and if James will just turn off the lights for a second... What? I don't think that's such a great idea, James said. I'm in the middle of a turn. I was suddenly fearless. No, I mean, when we hit a straight shot, just for a moment you could... Whoop. James mocked as he suddenly turned the lights off without warning. Oh, geez. I let out a little panic as visibility suddenly dropped to no way, no how. I then excitedly stuck my head just enough out the window to see the glimmering night sky right before James turned the headlights back on. Oh my God, that was so cool, I exclaimed again to the camera and to James. You could see the Milky Way, one arm of it at least, like they say you can. There were so many stars. It was amazingly beautiful. Isn't it? We could almost always see it in New Zealand. Life is beautiful. As I meandered and stumbled through my memories and into much deeper sleep, I remember that night entering Vegas, watching James gamble at blackjack and craps for the first time, seeing the city of sin in all of its intriguing glory, masterful art, and strange street pornography. We strolled through the Venetian's recreation of Venice, just to see, just for the fun of it, played at slot machines, and drank pretty much whenever one of the shot girls would come along and offer. That looked like a fun job. I bet I'd make a lot of tips if I could dress like that and have that confidence, be that pretty. I could never be that pretty. Between the streams of cigarette exhaust, as if I was in the middle of a dream, I could make out men at the bar staring at me expectantly. Don't let them touch you. We don't do that here. Y'all can look, but don't touch, a short redhead at a table to the side of us said sternly to a whiskey-pickled pig, still leering from his stool. James snickered. This guy, he gestured, he'll probably get thrown out. We wished we could eat at Mario Bertoli's restaurant, but settled on P.F. Chang's, which was still richly delicious and fulfilling after our wild but thoughtful adventure. We walked through Caesar's Palace and caught the tail end of an open theatrical show. James made a quick $50 at another blackjack table inside the casino, while I sipped at a gin and tonic with lime. On our way out, we had bought 4 cigars. We cut and smoked 2 of them in front of the Bellagio like we were 2 smooth renegades late in our celebratory toast to our Ocean's 11's heist. But I giggled, feeling like I was getting away with something despite the consequences of the road we were going down. And also, James clearly had no experience smoking anything, starting with his first few awkward puff coughs. I'm glad to see you finally happy and relaxed, James rasped after clearing his throat. This is your first time smoking anything, isn't it? I was still chuckling slightly. It's not yours? James looked at me with a little respect. In middle school, I tried it a few times. I shrugged. Wow, James laughed, having caught his breath. I'm astonished you've done something so contemptible before me. He thought for a moment. I almost tried weed once, but I don't think I ever would. I haven't, and I don't think I ever would either. I began to think, and added, Danny has. I'm really trying to reason with him on it, though. I don't want him getting into trouble. Your brother, Danny? James asked, in more of his prior astonishment. Damn. I never would have thought. He's really grown up. Impressive to see him outgrowing your mom and Sarah lately, but yeah, I'd be concerned about it too. I'm really proud of him, I beamed. He's coming into his own, really, but my mom and him sure are having issues, and he needs to be careful. I recalled walking back to our hotel after a night of very tame debauchery, still a little inebriated, and I remember feeling the presence of someone following closely behind us. The steps rushed up in a hurry and then slowly matched our strides. James, do you have your knife? He usually had a sizable pocket knife on him. Yeah, why? The steps were getting faster, and I couldn't believe I was the only one noticing. I'm a little unsure of that guy following us, I muttered, trying to keep composed while my heart lost its rhythm in my chest. James turned. Yeah, maybe. He stuffed his hand in his pocket. A separate alleyway had opened up ahead of us and to the side, which we were about to pass. My anxiety was like a siren in my head going off. I wanted to scream, James, let's cross the street and go the other way. But I knew I couldn't do that. I received loads of understanding from James, but I'd totally embarrass myself forever, right or wrong. So I clenched my fists, shrunk down, and got ready to fight, like I never had. A short time after passing the alley, the steps echoed away from us. Shoot, maybe that was nothing. Or it might have been a real threat. James winced, tucking his knife back into his pocket. Let's get back to the hotel. As I dreamed, I remember our last detour at the Hoover Dam, snapping dizzying photos down what looked like the most impossible-looking quarter pipe in the world. My gut screamed, "Wipe out city," not even to mention my sweaty palms crying for help. Sleep is like that light-speed time dilation you hear about in those space sci-fi franchises. Time passes faster. We coasted across Red Rock State Park and into vibrantly crimson Sedona and Phoenix without stopping. We bored through the whole entirety of New Mexico and Texas. In New Orleans, James sank his teeth into some fluffy, powdery beignets, while I reveled in finally having true blue southern grits once again. In 12 more hours, the adventure ended. we sailed right back headlong and overconfident into the bittersweet Misonesium of our hometown, family, and friends in West Palm Beach, Florida.